Our daughter Olivia is a thief, and we have the ultimate proof. That is exactly what my father announced, standing proudly at the head of the Thanksgiving table in front of 37 gasping relatives, mere seconds after a stranger marched through the front door to drop a crisp white envelope right onto my dinner plate. He looked down at me like an executioner delivering a verdict he had been meticulously rehearsing for months. A formal court summons, delivered right in the middle of the holiday meal, with every single eye in that dead silent room locked directly on my face. My mother was already crying on cue, her favorite, deeply toxic weapon, completely loaded and ready to fire. I stared down at the flimsy envelope. Then, I slowly looked back up at my father, and I smiled, because 5 agonizing months earlier, I had secretly hired a professional whose entire career is tracing exactly where stolen money disappears. And the horrifying truth they uncovered didn't just instantly clear my name, it completely burned down a massive, calculated lie my parents had been building since the very day my grandfather died. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm Olivia. I'm 34 and I'm a registered nurse from a small town in Alabama now. Let me take you back 9 months. Back to the heavy, rain-soaked week we buried my grandfather, Edward Parker. He died on a cloudy Wednesday in April. He was 86. Pneumonia, the doctors said. Quick at the end, I drove 4 hours straight from my apartment to the funeral home in Dayton, Alabama. Population 5,000, give or take. It's the kind of suffocatingly small town where everyone knows your maiden name, your family drama, and your credit score. I grew up on those quiet streets. My grandfather raised me half the time. He was my safe place. He taught me to read while we sat together on his creaky wooden porch. He took me fishing every single summer at Lake Blue Grove, right up until I turned 16 and foolishly thought I was too cool for bait and tackle. Years later, when I finally got accepted into nursing school, he mailed me a sweet, simple card with a $75 check tucked inside. The memo line in his shaky handwriting read, "Proud of you, Livy." I trace that memory in my mind, and it still breaks my heart, because during the last 4 years of his life, I barely heard a word from him. I called. He never answered. I sent heartfelt letters, bright birthday cards, photos from my long shifts at the hospital, and a hopeful Christmas note every single December. Nothing ever came back. No reply, no returned mail, just a thick, agonizing silence. Did I say something wrong? Did I somehow hurt him? I tortured myself with those questions. I told myself he was just getting older, maybe confused, or maybe angry about some tiny mistake I couldn't even remember making. Then came the funeral. My father, Gordon, stood at the front of the dim chapel and delivered a eulogy that honestly could have won a Hollywood acting award. He had real tears in his eyes. His voice cracked at all the perfect, tragic moments. "My father was the greatest man I ever knew," he whispered, gripping the polished wooden podium tight. I sat far back in the 4th row. Nobody asked me to sit closer. After the somber service, Gordon gathered us in the chilly church hallway. It was just me, my younger brother Nathan, and a few cousins standing awkwardly under the flickering fluorescent lights. Gordon casually straightened his black tie, cleared his throat, and said, "Dad left everything to me. The house, the savings, all of it. That was his final wish." No one questioned him. I almost didn't either. But something about the exact way those words left his mouth, too smooth, too heavily rehearsed, sat dead wrong in my chest. It felt exactly like reading a vital sign on a heart monitor that wildly doesn't match the dying patient in the bed. To understand why my stomach dropped, I have to take you back 12 years. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, and working my first brutal job at the county hospital. I was pulling 14-hour shifts. My massive student loans were already breathing down my neck, and I survived on cheap frozen burritos 4 nights a week. My father called me on a random Monday evening. He said he needed me to come to the house immediately. When I walked through the front door, he was sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, a massive stack of banking papers spread out like a trap. My mother, Diane, sat right beside him, her eyes already puffy and red. "We need your help, sweetheart," Gordon pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. "Just your signature. The bank needs a co-signer for the mortgage. It's completely temporary. 8 months, maybe less. Then I refinance, and your name comes right off." Diane loudly dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "We could lose the family house, Olivia." I was young. I loved them. I honestly thought family protected family. So, I signed my name on the dotted line. 8 months quickly became 2 years. 2 years painfully dragged into 6. 6 morphed into an agonizing 12 years. Every single time I brought it up, the argument played out exactly the same. "Dad, when are you refinancing?" I would beg. "My credit's not there yet," he'd snap back. "You want to throw us out on the street?" And right on cue, my mother would start crying. Clockwork, here is exactly what being a good daughter cost me. I couldn't qualify for my own tiny mortgage. I couldn't get approved for a reliable used car without a brutally high interest rate. My fragile credit score bounced between 590 and 630 because Gordon was constantly late on his payments, sometimes 45 days late, sometimes 90. And he never once warned me. I only found out the horrifying truth from an automated credit monitoring alert pinging my phone at 3 in the morning. 3 90-day late marks I never knew existed. My score had plummeted 50 points overnight. I called him the next day, panicking, breathless. He just sighed. "Things were tight, Olivia. I handled it." He handled his mistakes by using my name as a shield. But as I stood in that cold church hallway, staring at my father's smug face, a terrifying thought hit me. If he could steal my financial future without blinking, what exactly was he stealing from my dead grandfather? 3 agonizing weeks after we put Grandpa in the ground, I finally sat Gordon down at his own kitchen table. I kept my hands tightly folded in my lap, trying to hold my trembling together. "Dad, I need my name off that mortgage this year." No dramatic tears. No loud yelling, just a heavy, unavoidable fact. Gordon immediately leaned back in his wooden chair, crossing his arms like a fortress. "Now is not the time, Olivia. I just buried my father." Grief. He was using grief as a weapon to silence me. "I know, and I'm deeply sorry," I replied, forcing my voice to stay level. "But this has been dragging on for 12 years. His jaw tightened into a hard, unforgiving line. "You expect me to refinance right now? With what credit score? You think local banks are lining up to hand cash to a 63-year-old retired insurance man? Then sell the house, downsize. I don't care how we do it, but I need off that loan." He stood up so fast the chair scraped violently across the linoleum floor. "You want to talk about lawyers? You want to actually sue your own parents? Go right ahead. Let's see how that looks to everyone." I hadn't said a single word about lawyers. He added that terrifying detail himself. That exact night, my mother made 9 frantic phone calls. I know the precise number because 5 different relatives blew up my phone within 4 days. Aunt Margaret sent a stinging text message. "Your parents raised you, fed you, and this is how you repay their love? Shame on you, Olivia." My cousin Morgan left a highly disappointed voicemail. "Hey, I heard you're threatening to take your parents' house away. What's going on?" My father's cousin David called and scolded. "Family doesn't do this to family." Every single one of them repeated the exact same toxic version of the story. The twisted narrative Gordon and Diane fed them. Olivia is incredibly ungrateful. Olivia wants to steal the family home. Olivia is viciously turning on her grieving parents right after they lost Edward. Not one person called to ask for my side. Not one. Then Gordon called me one last time. His tone was flat, freezing cold. "You think you're the only one who can play this game? Your grandfather left everything to me. And if you keep pushing this issue, everyone's going to know what you really did with his money." I had zero idea what he meant. I hadn't touched a single dime of Grandpa's savings, but my stomach twisted into knots. He was already building a brand new dangerous lie. The nasty rumors weren't even the worst part. 3 days later, I was paged over the hospital intercom to the Human Resources Department. Brenda, the strict HR director, slid a stark white printout across her polished desk. "Olivia, we ran a routine background compliance check for your narcotics clearance," Brenda said, her voice tight and formal. "Your credit has completely cratered in the last 60 days. 3 consecutive 90-day defaults on a residential mortgage." All the blood rushed out of my face. Gordon hadn't just been a little late. He had completely intentionally stopped paying the exact moment Grandpa died. "You have until the Monday after Thanksgiving to provide legal proof of a dispute or a settlement," Brenda warned, refusing to meet my eyes. "Otherwise, hospital protocol requires immediate suspension." He knew. Gordon absolutely knew. He wasn't just trying to scare me into submission, he was actively, ruthlessly trying to destroy my nursing career so I would have zero money to fight him in court. The brutal clock was ticking. I had exactly 10 days before my entire life imploded. I sat alone in my freezing car outside the hospital after a grueling 14-hour night shift. I frantically did the math on the back of a crumpled pharmacy receipt. If Gordon stopped paying the mortgage entirely, which he had threatened before during our worst arguments, the bank would come after both of us. Complete foreclosure. My credit wouldn't just drop, it would plunge below 520 for years. It would officially cost me my job, the only stable, safe thing I had left in this world. If I somehow took over the payments myself to protect my name, paying $2,100 a month on a rural nurse's salary, I would be totally bankrupt inside of 20 months. I was already drowning in rent, student loans, car insurance, and groceries. There was zero margin for error, and if I pushed back publicly, Gordon had already poisoned the family well. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin firmly believed I was a greedy monster. Fighting back meant fighting completely alone. Trembling, I pulled up the mortgage account on my phone. I still had the old login access from years ago when Gordon casually asked me to keep an eye on things. That is exactly when I saw it. A brand new line item. A home equity withdrawal. $50,000 magically taken out just 4 months before Grandpa Edward passed away. Gordon hadn't just selfishly kept my name trapped on the mortgage. He had illegally used my co-signature to borrow massive amounts of extra money against the house without ever telling me, without a shred of my consent. $50,000 I never saw, never approved, now permanently tied like a heavy anchor to my name. I sat there in the dark for a very long time. The hospital parking lot was totally empty. The crumpled receipt in my lap was full of desperate numbers that simply didn't add up. My father didn't just trap me in a financial cage, he quietly went back to the trap in the dead of night, dug it $50,000 deeper, and handed me the shovel. The poisonous rumors didn't explode with a loud bang. They crept in through nasty little whispers. Gordon and Diane began telling our extended family, casually like it was tragic but common knowledge, that I had stolen cash from Grandpa Edward's house right before he passed. She went over there alone a few times near the very end, Gordon sadly told people. We found the bedroom dresser drawer completely empty afterward. Several $1,000s, just gone. There was zero proof. But in a suffocatingly tight-knit place like Dayton, a grieving father's broken word carries heavy, undeniable weight. My cousin Tyler called me on a Tuesday. "Hey, Uncle Gordon said you took some money from Grandpa's dresser. Several thousand. What's that about?" "That never happened, Tyler, I swear." "Okay, I'm just telling you what he said." He didn't believe me. I could hear the cold doubt in his voice. That quickly became the awful pattern. Nobody accused me directly to my face. They just quietly passed along the dirty gossip they heard. And every single time I frantically denied it, my voice shook. I sounded defensive, which tragically only made me look more guilty to them. At church the following Sunday, inside Grace Methodist, where my family had worshipped for 35 years, a sweet older woman named Mrs. Gallagher looked right into my eyes, then sharply turned her back and walked to the opposite side of the fellowship hall. She didn't speak a single syllable. She absolutely didn't have to. Then at work, a fellow nurse on my busy unit gently pulled me aside in the hallway. "Is everything okay at home? I heard something disturbing from my neighbor about your family and some missing money stuff." My stomach violently twisted. The toxic lies were leaking into my professional life now. That is exactly when the terrifying truth clicked in my brain. Gordon wasn't just carelessly covering his financial tracks. He was brilliantly, ruthlessly building a master narrative. If anyone ever dared to question the massive inheritance later, he wanted the entire town already primed and brainwashed to believe one simple thing: Olivia is a heartless thief. But my father slipped up. He mentioned the wooden dresser drawer. It was highly specific. Way too specific. How on earth did he know Grandpa kept emergency cash hidden inside a specific bedroom drawer, unless he had been aggressively digging through that exact piece of furniture himself? Running on pure, blinding adrenaline, I drove 50 miles to the county courthouse on my only day off. I parked illegally in the back lot and marched inside still wearing the wrinkled blue scrubs I hadn't changed out of, having come straight from a grueling shift. The desk clerk at the dusty probate office was a tired woman named Donna, wearing thick reading glasses on a beaded chain. I firmly told her I needed a full copy of the official probate file for Edward James Parker, deceased this past April. "Relation?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Granddaughter." She didn't hesitate. Probate records are completely public. Anyone can legally request them. She printed the thick file and handed it to me tucked inside a plain manila folder. I sat heavily on a hard wooden bench in the echoing courthouse hallway and opened it. I flipped past the boring cover page and completely froze. Staring back at me was a legally sworn affidavit, signed by Gordon. It stated, under penalty of severe perjury, that my current address was unknown, and I had been bitterly estranged from the family for 5 whole years. He erased me. That was exactly how he bypassed the strict state law requiring all direct living heirs to be properly notified of the legal process. He wiped my existence off the map just to rush the secret paperwork through. Then, I found the actual will. The document Gordon had proudly filed. It was neatly typed, officially notarized, and dated 16 months before Grandpa died. It coldly read, "I leave all real and personal property to my son, Gordon Richard Parker. All of it. The house, the savings accounts, everything." I read those brutal words twice. Then my eyes drifted down to the ink signature at the very bottom. Edward James Parker. I had lovingly traced my grandfather's distinct handwriting hundreds of times, on bright birthday cards every single year, on the memo line of every generous Christmas check, on a tiny folded note he left in my school lunchbox once when I was 10 years old that sweetly said, "You're smarter than you think, Livy." His real handwriting was naturally shaky but incredibly specific. The letter E always leaned sharply to the right. The P had a very tight, sharp loop. It was as deeply familiar to me as my own heartbeat. The black signature on that printed will was somewhat close, but it absolutely wasn't his. The E stood way too upright. The P was awkwardly short. The entire motion was way too careful, too slow. It looked exactly like someone sweating, trying very hard to manually copy a shape they had only glanced at a few times. I snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of the fake signature with my phone. My hands were finally steady. I wasn't deeply sad anymore. I was stone-cold certain. I zoomed in on the bottom corner of the legal document. The round notary stamp belonged to a man named Marcus Vance. I instantly recognized that familiar name. He was Gordon's former insurance office colleague, a loud guy who used to drink cheap beer on our back porch on summer weekends. I didn't drive home. I drove my car straight to Marcus's dingy strip mall office. I shoved the glass door open, marched inside, slammed the copied will flat on his cluttered desk, and leaned dangerously over him. "You illegally notarized a dead man's fake signature, Marcus," I said, my voice vibrating with pure, uncontainable rage. He instantly went chalk pale, his wide eyes darting nervously toward the exit door. "Gordon swore Edward signed it at the house earlier," he stammered, his sweaty hands visibly trembling. I just stamped the paper later. I didn't actually know." He didn't confess on a hidden tape, but the sheer, terrified sweat dripping down his guilty forehead gave me everything I needed. I walked out, climbed into my car, opened my phone browser, and typed a single, life-changing phrase into the search bar. "Forensic accountant near me." Gordon thought he had buried me alive with his lies. He didn't realize he had just handed me the exact match to burn his entire fake world to the ground. The dreaded phone call finally came late on a rainy Thursday night. I was quietly eating a bowl of leftover chicken soup alone at my small kitchen counter, when Gordon's name suddenly flashed brightly across my glowing screen. I stared at the buzzing phone, my chest tightening. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Thanksgiving dinner is at Margaret's house," he stated flatly the second I answered. No hello, no how are you, just a stiff, icy command. "You're coming." "I'll think about it," I replied cautiously. "No, you will be there, and you will apologize," he snapped. I slowly set my metal spoon down. The broth suddenly looked completely unappetizing. "Apologize for exactly what?" "For the money you stole, right in front of everyone." "I didn't steal a single thing, Dad." "Then you won't mind proving your innocence, will you?" A heavy, suffocating pause followed. "See you Thursday." The line went dead before I could even take a breath. I stood frozen in my dim kitchen for a very long time, gripping the cold phone tightly against my thigh. My soup grew completely cold. I never took another bite. Gordon absolutely wasn't inviting me to a warm family holiday dinner. He was meticulously building a courtroom, and I was the prime suspect. 25 minutes later, my phone chimed again. A massive text message from my mother. It was 4 rambling paragraphs packed with her usual manipulative language, using sweet, therapeutic words like healing and closure and moving forward as a family. But the very last line gave her away. "Your father just wants to resolve this privately. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be." Privately, right in front of 37 people. I later learned through the grapevine that Gordon had personally called 12 additional relatives, distant people who normally skipped our Thanksgiving entirely. Second cousins, a great-aunt from Mobile, Diane's old college roommate. He intentionally wanted the living room packed full. He desperately wanted an audience. Not witnesses to the honest truth, but blind witnesses to his grand performance. I collapsed onto my faded living room couch that night and stared blankly at the popcorn ceiling. I faced a brutal choice. I could easily skip the dinner, hide safely in my apartment, and let Gordon tell whatever twisted fairy tale he wanted to a crowd that already believed him. Or, I could brave the storm, walk straight into that crowded house, and face whatever trap he had carefully laid. I thought about my sweet grandfather. I thought about those 4 long years of confusing silence. I realized now that it wasn't silence at all. It was deliberate, cruel sabotage. I picked up my phone and texted Gordon back exactly one word: coming. Diane immediately called Nathan the very next morning. I know this because my brother called me an hour later, his voice shaky, sounding exactly like a terrified man standing on a high bridge desperately trying to figure out which side to jump to. "What's going on, Olivia? Mom is crying. She says you took cash from Grandpa." "Did you ever actually see me take anything, Nathan?" A painful beat of silence. "No. Did I ever even mention Grandpa's money to you? Ever, in my entire life?" "No," he admitted quietly, "but Mom is really upset. Mom is upset because I finally asked Dad to refinance the mortgage to save my own life. That is all this is." He went completely quiet. Nathan was 30, a hard-working electrician who lived just 15 minutes away from our parents. He had silently watched me carry that crushing mortgage on my narrow shoulders for a decade without ever complaining. He knew exactly what it cost me. He just never dared to say a word about it, because in our fractured family you simply didn't question Gordon Parker. You absorbed his messes and moved on. "They want me to stand firmly with them at Thanksgiving," Nathan murmured. "Mom said the family needs to be totally united right now." "United against who, Nathan? Me?" He didn't answer that question. "I'm not asking you to pick a side," I told him softly. "Just keep your eyes wide open." More heavy silence drifted through the speaker, then he whispered, "I'll be there, but I'm not giving any grand speeches for them." I told him that was more than enough and hung up. But something deeply unsettling stuck with me. That strange heavy pause before he said no, when I asked if he'd seen me take anything. It wasn't the normal hesitation of someone uncertain about the truth. It was the agonizing pause of someone who desperately wanted to confess something else entirely, something massive and heavy, but swallowed it back down out of sheer terror. I didn't push him. I figured if my brother had a secret to share, he'd eventually find the right moment. I just didn't know his secret was already 3 months old, sitting quietly as an audio file in his phone, recorded in a room he was never supposed to be standing in. Laura Mitchell was my only hope. She operated out of a neat little office above a dusty hardware store in Crestview, 25 minutes south of Dayton. She was a brilliant forensic accountant with 18 years of hardcore experience tracing hidden money through messy estates, ugly divorces, and small business fraud. I had found her website through a desperate Google search at 3 a.m. and booked the expensive appointment before I could talk myself out of it. She was a calm, sharply dressed woman with neat gray hair and thick reading glasses. Her wide desk was completely covered in color-coded folders. During our first meeting, she didn't show an ounce of dramatic emotion when I poured out my chaotic story. She just quietly took meticulous notes. 5 agonizing weeks later, exactly 2 weeks before the dreaded Thanksgiving dinner, I was back sitting in her quiet office. She smoothly placed a thick, professionally bound report on the wooden desk between us. "The dark ink signature on the file absolutely does not match," Laura stated firmly, tapping the cover. I carefully compared it to 19 other verified legal documents, old tax returns, signed bank cards, a vehicle title from 2016. "It is completely undeniable. It is not your grandfather's hand." "You're 100% sure?" I breathed, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I am unequivocally sure." She flipped past the signature analysis to the dense financial section. Edward's main savings account held exactly $310,000 at the precise time of his death. The family house appraised at roughly $210,000. Total estate value was approximately $520,000. Immediately after the rushed probate closed, Gordon rapidly withdrew $390,000 across several massive, hurried transactions. Laura had brilliantly mapped every single stolen dollar. I stared at the crisp spreadsheets as she read them aloud. $135,000 instantly paid off Gordon's massive personal credit card debt. $95,000 completely wiped out an outstanding loan on his luxury truck. $65,000 was quickly transferred to a hidden account under Diane's maiden name. $55,000 paid a local contractor for fancy home renovations. And finally, $40,000 was pulled out in untraceable raw cash. I stared blindly at the horrifying numbers. My grandfather's entire life of hard work, reduced to kitchen cabinets and a truck. He brazenly forged the will, I whispered, the sickening reality washing over me. And he stole $390,000. Laura nodded gravely. Do you want me to compile all this into a formal, legally binding report? Because once I stamp this, it becomes a registered document you absolutely cannot walk back from. I didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Do it, she closed the thick folder with a solid thud. I'll have it fully certified and ready for you in 12 days. 12 days. That would land exactly 4 days before the family Thanksgiving dinner, and just 6 days before the hospital HR department terminated my nursing contract forever. The invisible walls were closing in incredibly fast. $390,000. That wasn't just a moment of financial desperation from my dad. That was a calculated, cold-blooded master plan. My father was preparing a public slaughter for Thursday night, but he had absolutely no idea I was walking in with a loaded weapon of my own. 12 days. That was my terrifying countdown. Just 4 days before the massive family Thanksgiving, and a mere 6 days before hospital HR permanently terminated my nursing contract. The invisible walls of my life were closing in incredibly fast. $390,000 wasn't just an act of sudden financial desperation. That was a calculated, cold-blooded plan. My sweet grandfather used to mention his older sister Rose every now and then. Usually in passing, with a fond, knowing smile. Rose has got more sense than the rest of us combined, he'd say, shaking his head like it was both a high compliment and a gentle complaint. Rose Parker was 76 now. She lived entirely alone in a faded clapboard house down in Auburn, 45 minutes south of Dayton. She hadn't shown up to a single family dinner in 11 long years. There had been some explosive falling out with Gordon that no one ever fully explained, and the rest of the family just blindly accepted. I dug through a dusty shoebox in my closet and found her phone number written inside Grandpa's old leather-bound address book. I dialed it on a quiet Thursday evening, half expecting the deadline to just beep at me. She picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Parker? This is Olivia, Edward's granddaughter. A heavy silence stretched across the line. It lasted so long I honestly thought I had lost the connection. Then a soft, raspy voice whispered, Edward told me you would call one day. All the air violently left my lungs. What do you mean? Your grandpa gave me something 4 years ago, she murmured gently. He told me to keep it completely safe. He said if anything went terribly wrong after he passed away, you would eventually come looking for it. She invited me to her house that very Sunday. I drove down the empty highway with my heart beating so fiercely I could feel the pulse throbbing in my fingertips. Rose met me at the creaky front door. She didn't hug me. She just stared into my eyes for a long, searching moment, seeing my grandfather in my face. Then, she silently handed me a sealed, yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten will. It was Edward's real handwriting, shaky, leaning sharply to the right, totally unmistakable. It was legally witnessed by 2 of his longtime neighbors, and clearly dated 7 years before his heartbreaking death. The contents were incredibly simple, fair, and pure. Everything he owned was to be divided equally among his 4 grandchildren, Olivia, Nathan, Tyler, and Morgan. I looked up at Rose through a thick blur of hot tears. She sat down heavily in her floral armchair. Gordon came to your grandpa's house every single week those last 4 years, Rose said, her voice dripping with sorrow. He looked Edward right in the eye and told him you didn't want to see him anymore. He said you were too busy, that you had happily moved on. He didn't just steal money, he stole our goodbye. My brother didn't stop calling you, Olivia, she whispered, wiping a tear. Gordon stopped him. Exactly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, the clock glowing 10:14 p.m., Nathan's name suddenly flashed on my phone screen. I need to tell you something, he blurted out. His voice was incredibly low, rushed, and panicked, like a man whispering in a dark room he wasn't supposed to be hiding in. Don't ask how I know this. Okay, I'm listening. 3 months ago, I went over to the house to grab my drill set from the garage. I slipped in quietly through the side door. Mom and Dad were sitting in the kitchen. They didn't hear me come in. He paused. I could hear his jagged breathing through the speaker. Olivia, it was utterly terrifying. I hit record on my phone just as Dad started talking. He said, she can't prove anything. The will is filed, it's done. And then Mom asked, but what if she gets a lawyer? And Dad said, then we go louder, we make her the villain. Nobody's going to believe her over us. Nathan swallowed hard. The pure fear radiating from his end of the call was contagious. Then his heavy footsteps started walking straight toward the garage door. I froze completely. I ducked hard behind the old riding mower, my heart pounding so incredibly loud I thought he'd hear it right over the recording. The wooden door swung wide open. Gordon stood right there in the pitch dark. He reached out for the light switch, his hand hovering right over it, and then his cell phone rang inside his pocket. He cursed loudly, turned around, and went back into the kitchen. I climbed out the side window and ran for my life. Total silence hung between us on the line. "Nathan, do you still have that recording?" "I have the whole thing." He texted me the audio file while we were still talking. I pressed play. Gordon's cruel, calculating voice immediately filled my quiet apartment. Muffled, tiny, but absolutely unmistakable. Diane's nervous voice, too. Every single word played out exactly as Nathan described. The absolute staggering betrayal was caught on tape. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice breaking. He was quiet for a long, agonizing minute. "Because I was so scared, Olivia. They're my parents, too. I just didn't know what to do with it." I deeply understood that. I really did. Fear doesn't always look like violently shaking hands or running away. Sometimes it looks like 3 agonizing months of total silence, carrying a toxic recording on your phone like a live grenade you simply don't know how to throw. "Thank you," I told him softly. "That took real guts to tell me. What are you going to do now?" "I don't know exactly," Nathan replied, his voice suddenly shifting, growing hard and completely certain. "But I promise you this, Olivia. I am absolutely not walking into that Thanksgiving dinner empty-handed." The estate attorney's name was Harrison Brooks. He worked out of a tiny wood-paneled office right on Main Street in Athens. He had a proud university diploma hung on the wall and a firm, honest handshake that actually meant something. I dumped my entire chaotic life onto his polished mahogany desk. Laura Mitchell's detailed forensic report, the fragile handwritten will from Aunt Rose, the sneaky probate file from the county courthouse, and finally, the shocking audio recording from Nathan's phone. Harrison spent 45 agonizing minutes reading in total silence. The only sound in the room was the steady, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock standing in the corner. When he finally looked up, his eyes were incredibly sharp. "This is massive, intentional fraud. Clear as day," he declared, his voice cutting straight through the heavy tension. "He forged a legal signature, falsified a public probate filing, and flat out stole estate assets. You have total standing to challenge the fake will and file a massive civil claim. If the district attorney's office picks this up, your father is looking at serious criminal charges." "I'm not suing anyone, not yet," I whispered, rubbing my pounding temples. "I just need to be perfectly ready." He nodded slowly, narrowing his eyes. "Ready for what, exactly?" "My father is planning a massive public spectacle for Thanksgiving. I don't know exactly what his trap looks like, but I know him better than anyone. He won't let this go quietly." Harrison professionally assembled a thick legal packet for me. It held a clear summary of the forensic handwriting findings, a certified legal copy of the original handwritten will, and a stark printout of the bank transfers showing exactly where the stolen $390,000 went. He slid it all into a large manila envelope and sealed it tight. "If you ever need to use this," the lawyer said gently, "it absolutely speaks for itself." I tucked the heavy folder into my bag. It felt like carrying a loaded weapon. That evening, I nervously called Aunt Rose. "Would you please come to Thanksgiving dinner at Margaret's house tomorrow?" A painfully long hesitation drifted over the line. "I haven't stepped foot in a family gathering in 11 years, Olivia." "I know," I pleaded softly, "but I need you, for Edward." Another heavy pause. "For my brother. I'll be there." The night before the big dinner, my doorbell suddenly shrieked. It was Aunt Margaret. She didn't even knock. She violently pushed past me straight into my apartment, her face twisted into a hardened mask of self-righteous fury. "I am here to save you from your own sheer stupidity, Olivia," she hissed, pointing a sharp, manicured finger at my chest. "Tomorrow, you are going to sit quietly at my dining table. You are going to look your poor, grieving father in the eye, and you are going to beg for his sweet forgiveness. If you dare embarrass him, if you breathe a single word about his house, you will never exist to this family again." She didn't wait for a single word of response. She just spun on her heel and marched out, leaving my front door wide open to the freezing night air. The grand stage wasn't just completely set, it was rigged with hidden explosives. Let me pause right here for just a second. This internal thought isn't strictly part of the events, but I have to be totally honest with you. Sitting on the edge of my bed that night, staring at that sealed envelope, I almost completely backed out. Part of me, the exhausted, broken daughter who had spent 34 years just wanting a normal dad, still desperately wanted to believe there was a peaceful way out. If you held the absolute proof in your trembling hands, knowing it would blow up your entire family, would you bring it to the dinner table? Or would you swallow the pain just to keep the fake peace? Let me know in the comments. Thursday afternoon arrived. Aunt Margaret's house sat on a neat corner lot, a pristine white ranch-style home with black shutters. The driveway was completely jammed when I pulled up at exactly 1:30. Trucks, sedans, a family minivan. Someone had cheerfully taped colorful paper turkeys to the front glass door. Inside, 3 long folding tables were pushed together straight down the center of the massive living room, covered in mismatched autumn tablecloths. 37 individual place settings. The rich, mouth-watering smell of roasted turkey and warm cornbread dressing hit me the second I crossed the threshold. But the moment I stepped inside, the entire room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but I physically felt it in my bones, a chilling half-second pause in everyone's conversation. A few heads snapping away. Someone near the busy kitchen glanced at me and immediately whispered to their husband. Every single person in this house had heard Gordon's toxic rumors. Everyone had already picked their side. Aunt Margaret hugged me stiffly at the entrance. "Good to see you, honey," but her arms felt like rigid wood, and she let go a beat too soon. Gordon sat proudly at the absolute head of the center table. He wore a crisp navy blazer and a perfectly pressed shirt, wildly dressed up for a casual Thanksgiving. Diane sat faithfully beside him in a soft cream-colored sweater, her hands folded delicately, her eyes already glistening with fake sorrow. They looked exactly like a flawless couple posing for a Holy Church directory photo. Gordon spotted me and flashed a smile. It held zero warmth. It was pure, sickening satisfaction. The chilling smile of a predator who had already mentally rehearsed the next 3 hours. Aunt Rose slipped through the side door 20 minutes later. She sat at the absolute far end of the table. Nobody warmly greeted her. Most of the younger cousins didn't even recognize her tired face. 11 years is a lifetime in a growing family. Nathan sat trapped in the middle of the crowd, staring blankly down at his empty ceramic plate like it held the tragic answers to the universe. I quietly slid my heavy bag under my chair, the thick envelope pressed firmly against my ankle, a comforting anchor in a sea of lies. The golden turkey was carved, the lovely prayer was spoken, and Gordon waited. We were exactly 25 minutes into the tense meal when Gordon sharply tapped his silver butter knife against his crystal water glass. Clink, clink, clink. The noisy room went dead quiet in terrifying layers. The chatting adults stopped first, then the texting teenagers, and finally the clueless little kids at the window table. Someone quickly muted the loud football game playing on the den TV. Gordon stood up incredibly slowly. He placed both hands flat on the table, leaned forward slightly, and looked around the completely captive room like a man about to deliver a heartbreaking sermon. "Before we go around the table and say what we're truly thankful for," he began, his voice booming with authority, "I deeply need to address a dark cloud that has been heavily weighing on this family." My pulse skyrocketed into my throat, but I didn't move a muscle. He glanced sadly at Diane. She loudly dabbed her dry eyes with a linen napkin right on cue. Flawless execution. "Most of you have heard the terrible rumors," Gordon continued, his voice cracking perfectly. "I wish to God I didn't have to do this publicly. Believe me, Diane and I tried so hard to handle it privately, but our daughter left us absolutely no choice." He paused for maximum dramatic effect. A few older relatives shifted nervously in their seats. Uncle David set his metal fork down. "After my dear father passed, we discovered that a highly significant amount of money was missing from his private accounts. We desperately looked into it. We traced it, and the painful evidence points to one single person sitting in this room." He turned his body to face me directly. 37 stunned faces instantly followed his harsh gaze. "Our daughter Olivia is a thief," his voice rang out, cold and unwavering. "And we have the ultimate proof." The crowded room completely held its breath while Diane's fake crying grew louder. But Gordon, standing like an executioner, had absolutely no idea what was about to walk right through the front door. Right as those cruel words left my father's mouth, the front doorbell rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound that startled absolutely everyone. Aunt Margaret frowned deeply, her hand fluttering to her chest as she hurried to unlock the heavy wooden door. A stranger stood on the porch. He was a tall, bored-looking man wearing a cheap gray suit and a neon plastic lanyard. "Olivia Parker?" he asked loudly. His booming voice echoed straight into the dead-silent dining room, cutting through the smell of roasted turkey. Margaret numbly pointed a shaking finger at me. The strange man didn't even take off his muddy shoes. He walked right past her, marching past 37 gasping, wide-eyed relatives, and stopped right next to my folding chair. He carelessly dropped a crisp, official-looking white envelope directly onto my dinner plate, right on top of my napkin. "You've been served," he announced flatly. He immediately turned on his heel and walked out, letting the glass front door slam loudly behind him. Gordon proudly crossed his arms over his chest. He looked down his nose at me like a victorious king who had just publicly executed a dangerous traitor. "This is a formal court summons," Gordon declared, projecting his voice loud enough for the very back of the room to hear. "We are officially suing you for the immediate return of our father's stolen money." The massive room was so breathtakingly quiet, I could literally hear the little kids whispering nervously at the window table. I slowly picked up the white envelope. I cleanly tore open the flap and pulled out the stiff document inside. At first panicked glance, it looked terrifyingly real. It had a bold header with the county court's official name, a recent date, a defendant line printed with my full legal name, and a messy signature at the very bottom from a judge I had never heard of. But Gordon made one massive, fatal mistake. He forgot I had just spent 5 grueling months sitting across a desk from a brilliant estate lawyer. I knew exactly what a real, legally binding summons looked like. This flimsy paper had no official case number. There was no raised clerk's stamp in the corner. The printed font was completely wrong. Too clean, too uniform, like a standard Microsoft Word template. It was printed on cheap, everyday copy paper, not thick, textured legal stock. It was completely fake. Gordon had actually paid someone to mock this up. He hired a cheap amateur process server to publicly terrify me into submission in front of 37 witnesses. I stared down at the useless document, then gently laid it next to my plate, smoothing the edges. Uncle David leaned forward, his face pale. "Gordon, if you need urgent legal support, I know a very good attorney in town." A cousin's wife was frantically shaking her head in disbelief. Aunt Margaret looked like she might physically be sick. Diane was still doing her part flawlessly. Real tears now, perfectly mixed with her rehearsed performance. Gordon stood tall and waited. He fully expected me to violently deny the charges, to burst into hysterical tears, to beg for his mercy, or to angrily storm out of the house. That was his carefully written script. That was the crazy, ungrateful version of Olivia he had sold to every single person in this house. I calmly looked up at him. "Are you finished?" I stood up from my chair. No rushing, no panic. I carefully smoothed my linen napkin flat on the table, acting like I was simply finishing a lovely meal at a quiet restaurant. Every single person in that sprawling room was watching my hands. The football game on the TV remained muted. Even the restless toddlers had gone totally still. "I want everyone sitting here to remember one important thing," I said. My voice was incredibly steady. I wasn't putting on a theatrical performance. I was a million miles past that. "I did not start this tonight. Dad did." I slowly turned my body to face Gordon directly. "So, I am going to ask you one simple question, Dad. Right here, in front of your entire family. And I want a very clear answer." Gordon's chin lifted higher. He looked highly defiant, fully believing he was still the smartest man in the room. "Did Grandpa Edward actually write that will?" I asked. "Of course he did," Gordon snapped instantly. "You're entirely sure?" His dark eyes narrowed into angry slits. "Are you openly calling your own father a liar in front of my whole family?" I didn't bother answering that trap. I just let his angry question hang in the tense air like thick, suffocating smoke. Then, I slowly bent down and reached under my folding chair. My cold fingers found my heavy leather bag. I pulled out the thick manila envelope, sealed tight, heavy with hard facts. 5 agonizing months in the making. I placed it squarely on the autumn tablecloth, right next to his pathetic fake summons. The room didn't dare breathe. Gordon stared hard at the brown envelope. It was surprisingly thick. It looked dangerous. And for the very first time all evening, something major shifted behind his confident eyes. A tiny flicker of pure panic, fast like a candle caught in a sudden, icy draft. I looked right through him. "Funny," I whispered. "So do I." Nobody spoke a single word. Gordon's smug smile vanished, not slowly fading away, but all at once like an invisible hand had violently ripped it right off his face. I cleanly broke the seal on the envelope. Diane instantly stopped her fake crying. 37 people physically leaned forward in their chairs. I pulled the very first crisp page from the stack and held it high. "This," I announced clearly, "is a professional side-by-side comparison of the ink signature on the will Dad rushed through probate. against 19 verified legal signatures from Grandpa Edward. Old tax returns, verified bank documents, assigned vehicle title, all confirmed authentic. I passed the heavy page directly to Aunt Margaret, who was sitting the closest. Her hands shook as she fumbled to put on her reading glasses. The left column brightly displayed the signature from Gordon's filed will. The right column showed Edward's actual, beautiful handwriting. 19 different samples, all perfectly consistent. The gracefully slanting E, the sharp-looped P, the exact way his tired hand shook more in his final years but always kept the exact same rhythm. The dark signature on Gordon's will was stiff, highly upright, and way too careful. It was an awkward, sweaty copy made by someone trying way too hard. Margaret's pale lips parted. She looked up at Gordon in sheer horror, then back down at the damning page, then silently shoved it toward Uncle David without uttering a single sound. A licensed forensic accountant examined these exact samples, I continued, never breaking eye contact with my father. Her professional, legally binding conclusion is that the signature on the probate will is a complete forgery. That is a disgusting lie. Gordon's voice boomed, coming out way louder and more desperate than he intended. A few relatives actually flinched back. You paid some shady criminal to make that garbage up. I didn't argue back. I didn't raise my voice a single decibel. I am not asking anyone in this room to just blindly believe my words, I said softly. I am asking you to use your own eyes and look. The stark page slowly moved down the long table, passing from trembling hand to trembling hand. I watched their familiar faces rapidly change. First deep confusion, then shocking recognition, and finally something much, much harder: disgust. Uncle David held the paper directly up to the ceiling light, inspecting the ink strokes, and just shook his head slowly. Tyler stared at the evidence for a long, painful minute, then set it down and aggressively shoved it to the next person without even glancing at Gordon. Diane hadn't touched her crying napkin in 3 full minutes. She was staring at her husband, not with loving sorrow, but with raw, unfiltered terror. I reached deep into the envelope for the second document. I carefully pulled out a single, handwritten page. It was slightly yellowed, softly creased, and painfully familiar in a way that made my own throat ache. "This is Grandpa Edward's actual, real will," I said, my voice finally thick with emotion, written entirely in his own hand, legally witnessed by 2 of his next-door neighbors, and clearly dated 7 years before he died. I read the most important line aloud so everyone could hear. "I leave all real and personal property to be divided equally among my 4 grandchildren, Olivia, Nathan, Tyler, and Morgan." Not Gordon, not his only son, his 4 grandchildren. Gordon physically took a heavy step backward, bumping into the wall. "Where the hell did you get that? That isn't a legitimate legal document." And then Aunt Rose stood up. She had been sitting at the absolute far end of the table, remaining so incredibly quiet that most people had totally forgotten she was even in the house. She was 76 years old, physically tiny, silver-haired, and wearing a faded floral church dress she probably hadn't taken out of the closet in a decade. The entire room turned to look at her. "Edward personally gave it to me," Rose declared. Her voice was thin, but it sliced through the room like a razor blade. 4 long years ago. He sat me down at my own kitchen table, handed me this exact envelope, and said, "Keep this completely safe, Rose, because I do not trust my own son." Nobody dared to take a breath. "Gordon, Rose, you really don't know what you're—" Diane started to stammer, panicking. "I am not finished speaking," Rose snapped. She didn't have to shout. The raw authority in her tone commanded total obedience. "Gordon selfishly went to your grandpa's lonely house every single week those last 4 years, Rose continued, her eyes locked onto me, overflowing with heartbreak. He sat by Edward's chair and told him that Olivia didn't want to see him anymore. He spun a lie that she had happily moved on with her new life. Gordon ripped out the phone cords. He returned the letters she mailed. He blocked the doorway. Aunt Rose's chin trembled, but she stood tall. My brother Edward died completely alone, crying, thinking his favorite granddaughter had entirely forgotten he existed. My grandfather's heart had been broken by a lie, but the real devastation was about to hit Gordon when I pulled out the final piece of paper from my bag. I physically felt the massive room shift. The invisible loyalty tethering 37 people to my father simply snapped. The tense silence that followed wasn't mere confusion. It was the deafening sound of an entire family recalculating every single thing they had ever been told. Gordon's face went completely white. His jaw moved, but absolutely nothing came out. Diane frantically clutched her pearl necklace and whispered to no one, "Oh God." I expected to feel a massive wave of triumph. Instead, I just felt profoundly tired. I was staring at a man who traded his own soul for kitchen cabinets. I reached into the brown envelope one last time. After the rushed probate closed, Dad withdrew $390,000 from Grandpa's accounts. I held the crisp spreadsheet high so the entire room could clearly see the highlighted columns. This is exactly where every single dollar went. I read the list slowly, no anger, just cold, hard numbers. $135,000. Instantly paid to Dad's personal credit card debt. $95,000. Wiped out an outstanding loan on his luxury truck. $65,000. Secretly transferred into an account under Mom's maiden name. $55,000. Paid to a local contractor for fancy home renovations. I looked directly into Gordon's terrified eyes. $40,000. Withdrawn in untraceable cash. Destination completely unknown. I gently set the paper down next to the cold turkey. That is $390,000 that rightfully belonged to 4 grandchildren, not one greedy son. Gordon frantically grabbed the back of his wooden chair, his knuckles turning pure white. "That is my father's money," he spat. "He left it to me legally." "No, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a calm, devastating whisper. "He left it to us, all 4 of us. You forged his dying wish to steal it." The sprawling dining room was so incredibly still, I could hear the antique clock on Margaret's mantel ticking away the seconds. Someone at the far end of the table, Uncle David's wife, set her crystal glass down and pushed her chair back. It squeaked against the floor, a desperate attempt to escape without making a sound. My cousin Tyler was violently staring at the autumn tablecloth, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Morgan had both hands clamped over her mouth. Aunt Margaret, the harsh woman who had barged into my apartment the night before to demand my absolute surrender, slowly picked up her folded napkin. She placed it beside her untouched plate and physically pushed her chair away from my parents. She didn't stand up. She just created a few inches of distance. But in our family, those few inches meant absolute exile. Uncle David, the exact same man who had confidently offered Gordon a lawyer 10 minutes ago, turned in his seat. His voice was dangerously careful. "Gordon, is this true?" My father looked wildly at David, then at Margaret, then at Diane. Diane had stopped her fake crying entirely. She was staring blankly at the table like she prayed the floorboards would open up and swallow her whole. Gordon didn't answer them. His frantic eyes swept the crowded room, desperately searching for someone, anyone, still standing on his side. He found absolutely no one. "She's manipulating all of you." Gordon's voice horribly cracked on the second word. He sounded pathetic. "These are totally fabricated. She paid shady people to—" "Then explain the money, Dad," I interrupted. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. $390,000. Where did it go? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a dying fish. Nothing. That is exactly when Nathan stood up. Every single head in the room whipped toward the middle of the table. Nathan, 30 years old, always so quiet, the gentle brother who never took sides, was standing tall with his smartphone clutched in his trembling hand. "I heard them," Nathan announced. His voice was incredibly tight, like he was holding his entire crumbling world together with both fists. 3 months ago in the kitchen, they didn't know I was hiding out in the garage." He looked at Gordon, then shifted his heartbroken gaze to Diane. "Dad said she can't prove anything. The will is filed, it's done." "Gordon, Nathan, please don't," Diane whimpered. "And Mom said, but what if she gets a lawyer?" Nathan continued, ignoring her tears. "And Dad said, then we go louder. We make her the villain. Nobody's going to believe her over us." Nathan firmly tapped his glowing phone screen and set it down right in the center of the table. Gordon's cruel, muffled voice instantly filled the room, recorded straight through a thin garage wall. But every single poisonous word was clear enough to land a fatal blow. "She can't prove anything. The will is filed. It's done." Then Diane's nervous voice. "But what if she gets a lawyer?" Then Gordon again, dripping with malice. "Then we go louder. We make her the villain." The audio recording clicked off. The suffocating silence that followed was the absolute loudest thing I had ever experienced in my entire life. Gordon collapsed heavily into his chair, looking like the physical bones in his legs had completely dissolved. Diane didn't reach out to comfort him. Instead, she leaned away and hissed, barely above a frantic whisper, "I told you this would happen." Not a shred of grief, not a drop of shame, just pure venomous anger directed at her partner in crime. She had known everything. She had actively warned him, and now the entire room knew she was completely complicit. "I have to be completely honest with you right now," Standing proudly in that crowded room, watching my father's arrogant face completely cave in, I didn't feel victorious. I felt totally hollow. This wasn't a satisfying Hollywood movie. This was Thanksgiving. These were the broken people I had fiercely loved my entire life. But I learned a massive, life-altering lesson that day. Love absolutely does not mean letting someone dismantle your sanity, and keeping silent isn't keeping the peace. It's just giving them permission to destroy you. Quick question for you guys listening. Do you honestly think Nathan did the right thing by waiting 3 whole months? Or should he have warned me the exact day he heard that recording? I'm genuinely curious. Drop your honest take below. Let me tell you exactly what happened after that catastrophic dinner. Nobody touched the pumpkin pie. People evacuated the house in rapid waves. First, the outer ring of distant relatives grabbed their coats, then the angry cousins, then the silent uncles. Almost no one said goodbye to Gordon or Diane. They just practically ran out the front door. A few people stopped to hug me tightly on the chilly porch. Tyler gripped my shoulder hard and promised, "We will talk this week." Morgan found me standing by my car in the dark driveway. Her eyes were red. If that handwritten will is real, and I deeply know it is, we were all robbed, Olivia. All 4 of us. I know, I whispered back. I'm not telling anyone what to do next. But that forensic report is just as much yours as it is mine. I want you to have a full copy. I'll email it tomorrow morning. Within exactly 1 week, Tyler and Morgan had retained their own aggressive estate attorney. They officially filed a massive legal petition with the county probate court to forcefully reopen Edward Parker's estate, citing hard evidence of signature forgery and the hidden existence of a prior valid will. I wasn't the one who filed the lawsuit. My cousins made that brave decision entirely themselves. I simply handed them the sharp truth, and they brilliantly chose to act on it. There is a massive difference, and that boundary deeply matters to me. My father thought he could terrify me with a fake legal document at dinner, but he had absolutely no idea the devastating legal storm my cousins were about to unleash on his front doorstep. Tyler's sharp new attorney also thoroughly reviewed Gordon's fake summons, the exact same paper his hired stooge had arrogantly slid onto my dinner plate like a live grenade. There was no active case number, no clerk's official filing stamp. It absolutely was not on record with any legitimate court in the entire state of Alabama. It was just basic printer paper stuffed inside a plain white envelope, a cheap theatrical prop. Tyler's lawyer put the reality bluntly. Your father tried to illegally intimidate you with a useless document that holds the legal weight of a takeout restaurant menu. Gordon hadn't officially filed a single thing. He had desperately staged a cruel performance with a piece of trash that wouldn't survive 15 seconds in front of a real judge. He tried to scare me into permanent submission using a fake threat, but the actual, binding paperwork, the kind of evidence that sends people to prison, was safely locked inside my manila envelope. My lawyer, Harrison Brooks, fired the ultimate warning shot. He mailed a strict, certified letter directly to Gordon Parker on a Tuesday morning, exactly 9 days after the disastrous holiday dinner. The legal demand was crystal clear. Olivia Parker legally requires Gordon Parker to fully refinance the property at Tokens Measure Units address Cardinal 412 Trenton Way. Preserve_order Truhemelns and permanently remove her name as a cosigner within 90 calendar days. Total failure to comply would instantly trigger a massive civil lawsuit for devastating damages, specifically targeting the unauthorized $50,000 home equity withdrawal he stole behind my back. Gordon was suddenly facing a brutal probate challenge from 3 furious grandchildren, extreme potential criminal exposure for fraud, a pending state investigation into his fake affidavit, and the complete, embarrassing evaporation of his precious reputation. In a tiny town where everyone now knew exactly what a monster he was, my father finally ran out of moves. He did not fight it. He miraculously refinanced the loan in just 6 short weeks. I received the official bank notification on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was sitting exhausted in the drab hospital break room, mindlessly chewing a stale granola bar between checking on patients, when my phone suddenly buzzed against the table. The automated email was incredibly short. Your name has been successfully removed from the attached mortgage account, effective immediately. I instantly forwarded the PDF proof to Brenda in HR. My nursing job was officially safe. My career was secure. I sat frozen in that plastic chair for a very long time. A sweet coworker gently touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I nodded yes, unable to form actual words. Then I practically ran out to the employee parking lot. I climbed into the driver's seat of my beat-up car, left the engine completely off, gripped the steering wheel, and wept. I sobbed until my ribs ached. It wasn't tears of pure joy. Not exactly. It was the overwhelming, physical release of a toxic burden I had been dragging for so long I had forgotten how incredibly heavy it was. A dozen years of someone else's reckless debt attached like a metal chain to my name. A decade of begging for a refinance that never came. 12 years of helplessly watching my credit score plunge into the dirt because the selfish man who proudly called himself my father couldn't be bothered to pay his bills on time. All of that endless suffering, completely erased in 42 days. I pulled up my credit monitoring app on my phone through blurry eyes. The fragile number had already started climbing upward. 650, then 690. The local banker promised me it would easily reach a shiny 720 within 8 months. It wasn't completely perfect, but it was finally, truly mine. Aunt Rose called me exactly a week before Christmas. "Come by this Sunday," she murmured. "I have something very special for you." I drove down to Auburn on a freezing, steel-gray December morning. Rose's cozy house smelled intensely of dark roast coffee and fresh cedar wood. She was already sitting quietly at her rustic kitchen table, a faded cardboard shoebox resting right in front of her. "These belong to you," she said softly, pushing the box across the wood. "Edward desperately wanted you to have them." Inside the dusty box were letters. 14 of them, lovingly written by my sweet grandfather over the agonizing last 4 years of his life. He had faithfully penned them to me, one every few months, and secretly mailed them directly to Rose. He did this because he quickly realized Gordon was maliciously intercepting every single piece of mail that went to my apartment address. My hands shook violently as I opened the very first envelope. The blue ink was shaky, the lined paper was softly creased. It was dated 4 years before he passed. "Livy, your daddy told me you don't want to see me anymore." I absolutely don't believe him. But if it's somehow true, I want you to know I'm not angry with you. I just deeply miss you. Tears splashed down onto the paper. I reached for the very last letter in the stack. It was written a mere 2 months before his lungs gave out. "I'm proudly leaving the house and all the savings to you kids, all 4 of you. If your father tries to do something different, go find Rose. She's got the real copy. I love you, Livy. I always did." I set the fragile paper down on Rose's table and pressed both my palms totally flat against the hard wood. The grain was freezing cold under my skin. I forced my brain to focus intensely on that physical texture, the biting cold, the solid wood. Because if I didn't violently anchor myself to something real in that exact second, I was going to dissolve into a million broken pieces. He never stopped writing to me. Through all those years of forced silence, he faithfully wrote loving letters he knew I might never receive, trusting his sister to hold the sacred truth. Rose quietly poured me a steaming cup of coffee. Neither of us spoke a single syllable for an hour. My grandfather didn't just leave me a chunk of money, he left me undeniable, permanent proof that he never ever gave up on our love. Nathan called me the following week. It was the very first time in years my brother had reached out without the conversation centering entirely around our toxic parents' drama. "I'm so incredibly sorry I didn't tell you about that recording sooner," he apologized, his voice thick with regret. "You told me exactly when it mattered most, Nathan," I reassured him. "That's more than enough for me." We slowly started meeting up every single Sunday morning at a tiny rundown diner on Highway 21, a cozy little place called Mabel's, featuring severely cracked vinyl booths and bottomless black coffee. We would sit together for an hour, sometimes 2. We casually talked about the changing weather, our stressful jobs, and absolutely nothing important. And then very slowly, the protective walls crumbled, and we talked about everything else. Nathan confessed that Gordon had aggressively tried to pressure him into co-signing a massive personal loan 2 years ago. Nathan bravely refused. In retaliation, Gordon completely stopped speaking to his only son for 4 agonizing months. He just froze him out. No phone calls, no dropping by. 0 acknowledgement at any family birthdays. "I honestly thought I had done something horribly wrong," Nathan admitted, staring down into his dark coffee mug. "It took me a long time to realize his silence was a calculated punishment. I told my brother all about the hidden letters, about Grandpa Edward secretly writing to me through Aunt Rose, about how Gordon had looked a dying man in the eye and swore I wanted nothing to do with him." Nathan stared blankly at the sticky diner table. "He actively played us against each other," he whispered in disbelief, "our whole entire lives." "I know," I breathed. "He deliberately kept us separate so neither of us would ever compare our notes." "I know that too." We sat completely still for a very long time, not saying another word, just existing in that same cracked booth, drinking that same bitter coffee. It was honestly the most deeply comfortable, safe silence I had shared with another human being in over a decade. We didn't actually lose our parents that explosive Thanksgiving night. We had tragically lost them long before that. We simply didn't possess the vocabulary for the abuse yet, but what we beautifully found, sitting across from each other in a cheap diner on quiet Sunday mornings, was a profound bond we hadn't felt since we were little kids running in the backyard. We finally found each other. I honestly thought the hardest part of this nightmare was completely over. I thought the ugly truth had finally set me free. But exactly 2 months later, my phone violently rang at 7:30 in the morning, and the name flashing on the screen belonged to the one person I swore I would never speak to again. My phone buzzed relentlessly against the nightstand. 7:30 a.m., the glowing screen displayed my mother's name. Diane. I almost didn't answer, but something about the incredibly early hour, she never called before 9, forced my thumb to swipe accept. I know you won't ever forgive us, her voice echoed thinly through the speaker. It was entirely flat, no dramatic tears, no heavily rehearsed performance. For the absolute first time in my entire life, my mother sounded like she was speaking without a script. I just want you to know I didn't want it to go this far. I leaned heavily against my cold kitchen counter. She didn't want it to go this far, but she happily packed the bags for the trip. But you let it, Mom, every single step. I know, she whispered. You frantically called 9 relatives and branded me a thief. You sat perfectly still next to Dad while he waved a fake legal summons in my face. You actively helped him cut me off from my own dying grandfather. A silence stretched so long I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. Then, a pathetic, trembling confession. I was terrified of losing the house, Olivia. I know that's not a good enough excuse, but that is what it was. I believed her. Not because it magically excused her cruel actions. It absolutely didn't. But because I had seen that blinding fear before. Diane Parker had spent 37 years married to a man who made every minor inconvenience feel like standing on the edge of a jagged cliff. She was deeply afraid. She was completely wrong. Both tragic things were undeniably true. I need serious space, Mom, I told her, my voice resolute. Don't call me for a long while. Okay, she breathed. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Gordon never called. Not once. No angry text. No demanding letter. No passive-aggressive message passed through a distant relative. For the first time in 63 years, Gordon Parker had absolutely nothing left to say to anyone. I spent a long time wondering if his total silence was genuine guilt, crushing shame, or simply the terrifying absence of a master plan. Then one day, I just stopped wondering. I didn't violently slam the door on them. I just finally stopped holding it open. In a suffocatingly small town, you don't need to hold a loud press conference to clear your name. You just need one explosive Thanksgiving dinner. By the first week of December, every single family in our tight circle, and most of the congregation at Grace Methodist, knew exactly what Gordon and Diane had done. Not because I gloated or told them. I didn't have to. 37 shocked people had sat in that dining room. At least half of them went straight home and gossiped to someone else. That is exactly how the invisible machinery works in Dayton. Gordon and Diane rapidly stopped getting invited to social events. No festive Christmas party at the Gallagher's house. No cheerful New Year's potluck at the warm church hall. Aunt Margaret, Diane's own flesh-and-blood sister, called her 4 days after the dinner and sternly said, I don't know exactly what you two did, but do not call me for a while. I need time. Diane foolishly tried to post a vague family update on Facebook. Something sweet and manipulative about false accusations and a family misunderstanding blown totally out of proportion. Within 1 single hour, Tyler ruthlessly commented with a direct web link to the public probate fraud filing. Diane deleted the entire post before dinner time. At Sunday church, Gordon still confidently shook hands with the pastor after the service, exactly like he always did. But the friendly people who used to linger and chat quickly moved on. No one was openly rude. No one publicly confronted him. They just drastically shortened their interactions. Fewer words, much less eye contact. The invisible, brutal arithmetic of a small town permanently adjusting its social ledger. Mrs. Gallagher, the older woman who had turned her back on me months ago in the fellowship hall, actively tracked me down in the grocery store parking lot one Sunday morning. She gently touched my arm, her eyes full of regret. I owe you a massive apology, honey. I blindly believed the wrong person. I told her I completely understood, because I honestly did. Nobody officially banished Gordon and Diane. Nobody had to. In a small, quiet town, silence is always the absolute loudest sentence. The slow-moving probate court officially accepted the legal petition to reopen Edward Parker's estate in late February. It moved shockingly faster than I ever expected. The stern judge carefully reviewed the forensic signature analysis, the pristine original handwritten will signed by 2 living witnesses, the highly fraudulent affidavit Gordon used to legally erase me, and the damning bank records showing the $390,000 in rushed disbursements. She immediately appointed an independent handwriting expert to evaluate the ink signatures. The court expert's conclusion perfectly matched Laura Mitchell's report. The signature on the filed will was absolutely not Edward Parker's. With the massive probate case officially reopened, Gordon now faced 2 terrifying tracks of consequences. The first was civil. The judge would legally order the immediate redistribution of all remaining estate assets exactly according to the handwritten will. 4 grandchildren, equal shares. The second track was criminal. Brazenly forging a will and filing a false legal affidavit in Alabama is a severe felony, estate fraud. The district attorney's office officially opened a preliminary review. No handcuffs yet. These complex things take time, but the legal file was wide open, and the evidence was bulletproof. Gordon's panicked lawyer strictly advised him to negotiate immediately. Gordon didn't have a single shred of leverage left. The beautiful house on Edward's property, the one he had been so incredibly desperate to steal, had to be listed for public sale. The cash proceeds, combined with whatever little money remained in the drained accounts, would be legally redistributed. After heavy legal fees, each grandchild received approximately $95,000. It wasn't a life-changing billionaire fortune, but it absolutely wasn't nothing either. Tyler proudly used his rightful share to completely pay off his truck. Morgan happily put hers straight toward her young daughter's college fund. Nathan hadn't decided yet. I quietly transferred my share into a high-yield savings account and didn't touch a single penny for 2 full months. I desperately needed to make sure the money felt completely clean before I spent $1. I needed to know it wasn't bitter anger money or toxic revenge money. I wanted it to be exactly what Grandpa Edward intended. A loving share of what he had proudly built, gently passed down to the people he deeply loved. Gordon carelessly blew through $390,000 trying to aggressively fake a wealthy life he couldn't afford. It ended up costing him absolutely everything he had left. 5 incredibly peaceful months after Thanksgiving, I finally bought a house. Nothing massive or fancy, just a perfect little 2-bedroom cottage on Oak Avenue, a quick quarter-mile walk from the hospital. It had crisp white siding, a bright green front door, and a cozy wooden porch just wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. 1,100 square feet, built solid in 1982. I proudly put down the clean money from Grandpa Edward's estate, $95,000, and easily qualified for the rest of the mortgage entirely on my own credit. My hard-earned score had beautifully climbed to 715 by then. The smiling loan officer shook my hand firmly across his desk and said, "Congratulations, Miss Parker. No mandatory cosigner, no toxic second name on the massive stack of paperwork, just mine. My name, my home, my peace." The very first night, I sat cross-legged on the empty living room floor with a greasy pizza box and a tall glass of iced sweet tea. I just stared at the bare white walls. No fancy furniture yet, no curtains, just clean beige carpet and the soft hum of a used refrigerator I'd bought off Craigslist. I hung exactly one thing that night: a beautiful, framed photograph of Grandpa Edward proudly standing by Lake Blue Grove, gripping a fishing rod in one hand and flashing a grin so wide you could easily count every one of his remaining teeth. I carefully set it on a sturdy nail right above the brick fireplace and took a slow step back. "Not bad, Grandpa," I whispered to the quiet, empty room. The next morning, I drove to work at the county hospital. Same brutal shift, same wrinkled scrubs, same exact parking lot where I had once sat hyperventilating, desperately calculating how long until my father's crushing debt destroyed me. The math was entirely different now. Rent was now a mortgage, my mortgage, and the numbers finally beautifully worked. I'm absolutely not telling you this highly personal story because I think I'm some fearless hero. I'm telling it because for 12 agonizing years, I falsely thought endless endurance was the exact same thing as love. I truly thought saying yes to absolutely everything my selfish parents demanded, even when it physically hurt, even when it bankrupted my future, was exactly what a good daughter was supposed to do. I was so completely wrong. A boundary isn't a brick wall, it's a door. You hold the key. You alone choose who gets to walk safely through it, and you choose exactly when it firmly closes. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. That is architecture. You are building a safe house for your own soul. If you are currently trapped in a toxic situation like mine, if someone in your family is ruthlessly using their love as currency, trading basic affection for blind compliance, making you feel horribly guilty for simply protecting yourself, I desperately need you to hear this truth. Saying no does not make you ungrateful. It does not make you cold, or selfish, or whatever nasty word they angrily reach for when they realize they are losing their iron grip on you. It makes you a human being who finally decided their own life actually matters. And if you are lucky enough to have grandparents who are still breathing, please call them. Not next week. Today. Do not let anyone else control that sacred relationship. Do not let a bitter parent decide what your grandparent knows about you, or what you know about them. I tragically lost 4 irreplaceable years with a man who fiercely loved me because my insecure father simply decided I didn't deserve to know it. I can't ever get those stolen years back. No massive amount of court money fixes that hollow ache in my chest. Do I still love my parents? Yes, I carry that complicated love exactly the way you carry an old deep scar. It's permanently part of you. It undeniably shapes you. But you absolutely do not let a scar dictate where you walk tomorrow. I just finally learned to love myself more. And that is not a sin. It is absolutely not a betrayal. It is the bare minimum survival skill that took me 34 painful years to master. I didn't boldly win a family war. I just finally stopped volunteering to be a casualty. Here is exactly where things stand today. The massive probate case is still slowly grinding through the Alabama court system. Gordon hasn't been officially charged criminally yet. The district attorney is meticulously reviewing the mountain of evidence, and these serious things move at a snail's pace in rural counties. I'm not actively pushing for his arrest. If it happens, it happens. I have legally handed over what I possess, and the justice system will simply do what the system does. Gordon and Diane somehow still live in that big house on Trenton Way. They refinanced it clean. My name is permanently gone, but the sprawling house feels incredibly small now, I imagine. Much fewer people ever drop by. Far fewer phone calls to answer. The fake, glamorous world they aggressively built with borrowed money and borrowed trust has completely contracted to the suffocating size of a kitchen table built for 2. Nathan came over to my new house last weekend to help me properly paint the living room walls. He brought a large pepperoni pizza and 2 heavy cans of white primer. We honestly got way more wet paint on our old clothes than on the actual drywall, but we got the job done together. We sat on the messy plastic drop cloth afterward, eating cold pizza and completely avoiding talking about our parents. We simply don't need to anymore. Aunt Rose mailed me a sweet package last week. Tucked inside was a faded photograph I had never seen before in my life. It was Grandpa Edward gently holding me when I was just 4 years old at what looks like a sunny Labor Day picnic. He is throwing his head back, laughing loudly. I am gripping a bright sparkler with both tiny fists. On the back, written in his beautiful, shaky handwriting, "Livy, Grandpa's so proud of you." I proudly taped it to my new refrigerator, right next to my spotless nursing license. My father ruthlessly tried to rewrite my grandfather's beautiful story. He brazenly forged a signature, stole a generational legacy, and cruelly silenced a dying man's final wishes. He came terrifyingly close to rewriting my entire life, too. But the absolute truth, exactly like a real, authentic signature, simply cannot be forged, not when the right people bravely keep the original safe. That is my story. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying all the way to the very end. It means more to me than you will ever know. If this painful journey hit close to home, if you've ever had to agonize between keeping a fake peace and keeping your own dignity, I would truly love to hear from you. What would you have done sitting at that tense Thanksgiving table? What would you have said? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want another intense story exactly like this one, there's a link in the description that I promise will stay with you just as long. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.